In the last section, we learned about React's events, how to access the DOM API, and how to read input from users with controlled components. In this section, we're going to talk about React components lifecycle and the methods React exposes for us to customize the behavior of React components. We'll see methods for mounting and unmounting components and methods when the components get updated in the DOM. Let's first talk about the mounting-unmounting events. React currently has 3 lifecycle methods for these events. React Components has lifecycle methods that we can use to control the execution at specific points in a component's lifecycle. There is component will mount, did mount, will receive props, should component update, component will update, component did update, and component will unmount. These are various points during the lifecycle of a component where React provides functions for us to customize the behavior of the component. Let's see how to use them. I'm going to use a different example here. Let's clean up this example, empty state, no functions or handlers, and render a very simple greeting component. Greeting. And let's go ahead and define this greeting component. Class greeting extends component, and it renders a simple greeting. And let's make sure this is actually working. Perfect. Now I'm going to define all the component lifecycle hooks on this greeting component. They go in here. Component will mount, component did mount, component will receive props, should component update. This is actually a special one. I need to return true in here. I'll explain that in a little bit. Component will update, which we'll explain in the next video, and also component did update. And finally, component will unmount. And I'm going to put a console log statement in every one of those. Let's test. When we render, we first see the in-app render, and then we see in component will mount. I don't see component did mount because, well, we missed an N here. So component did mount. Okay, so we see in component will mount and in component did mount. Now it's important to understand the difference between these two. So I'm going to put a debugger line after this line and another debugger line after this other one. Well, let's test now. You'll see how React stopped on the first debugger line because we are in component will mount. However, the component is not rendered in the DOM yet. All we know is that the component is going to mount after this line. So now let's hit play. And now we're in component did mount, but the component did actually render in the DOM. So at this point, we are in component did mount. The component has mounted to the DOM successfully. Okay, so I don't see any of the other lifecycle hooks because we haven't really updated the component, because these 4 lifecycle hooks here are related to updating a component, so we're not going to see them until we update the component. However, this one happens when we unmount the component. To unmount this greeting component, let's put a variable in the state. It says show greeting, and this variable starts as true. Now let's create a timer here, which is just a function that runs after 5 seconds. And inside this function, we're going to set the state and change show greeting into false. And to use this state, I'm going to put this greeting in an expression and say this.state.show greeting and end greeting. So this will short circuit show greeting if it's false. The greeting is not going to show up. Let's test. Hello is rendered. We have in component will mount, did mount, and after 5 seconds, hello is going to go away because show greeting turns into false. And you can see how we have in component will unmount. The in component will unmount code was fired right when we removed the greeting from the DOM. So we could put any custom behavior in those mounting and unmounting lifecycle methods. Usually you would use the lifecycle methods to integrate React components with other libraries, for example, or to do any cleanups for timers and observers that you start. So for example, this timer here, we should actually clear it inside the app component will unmount lifecycle method. And similarly, any listener that you start during the lifecycle of a component should also be cleared in component will unmount.